in video games for over 20 years. And you started as a 2D artist, then you became a project manager, and you were developing games for home console, for PC, for Game Boy, for mobile. Before then, founding your own studios, Spiders, in 2008. I think actually you're based in Paris, right?
Yeah, it's based in Paris. Yes.
And you're the CEO and the lead writer. And
I'm the one creating the universe. That's why what we are talking about today. But also writing the dialogues and scenarios in most of our games, not all of them, but most of them. And I'm also, managing the company. So I'm trying to share my time between these two different jobs.
yeah, and your latest release is the colonial era fantasy RPG Greedfall, I'm sorry. And you received a prize for Personality of the Year in 2020, which is the Pégase, or is it right? Have I pronounced it right?
Pégase.
Because
Yeah.
What is it?
It's the name of the flying horse in the Greek mythology.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Now I get it. Yeah. Okay. So that's everything about Jehanne from me, and the rest will come from Jehanne directly. Welcome, and here we go.
Thank you, and I'm very, very happy to be here with you. I will be presenting you, the how and why we created Greedfall. I will switch to a presentation. It will be easier for me to, if I'm managing to share my screen. Yeah, I hope it's okay. So, we began working on Greedfall. It was in 2016, as far as I remember. Let me check that. Yeah. First, we in Spiders, we are specialized into developing RPGs. And obviously, we still wanted to develop this type of game, but we wanted to create a new IP, but we had plenty of discussion, of course, brainstorm, and where did the first idea came from? So we have to remember that our previous game was set on Mars. It was a game more sci-fi into its ambience. It was very post-apocalyptic. And to be honest, after more than 2 years spent on Mars, the barren environment was a bit overwhelming, and we were looking for something new and something different. We wanted to have trees and greenery, and it was a little difficult to stay on that type of desertic environment. So we wanted something new. And we also wanted to avoid the usual medieval fantasy setting. We already developed a game a long time ago that was called Bound by Flame, that was set into a more traditional fantasy setting. And I love Tolkien, but I really wanted, something different. I think that there are already plenty of amazing games and books and, and series about medieval fantasy. And we wanted, to create something different, but different to which point and how we would create that. So we first worked on choosing some keywords for the experience we wanted to create, because we were creating an IP and the words, but we were also at first creating a video game. So what would be the keywords on the gameplay aspect? These keywords, coming from our previous experience on Mars and on the Technomancer, the game was set, the name of the previous game, was a little limited, because we had technological limitation, and we had also a small team. So we had an environment that was mostly linear. So we wanted to change that. We want to have bigger environment, more open environment. And even if we knew we weren't able to develop an open world, it was for us important to be able to offer a different experience. So we thought about two keywords that were very important to our idea of this new game, of these coming games, and it was exploration and discovery. Based on these two keywords, we began to thought into different eras we could use as a kind of inspiration for our fantasy world. Some talked about, going into a complete fantasy stuff, not related to history. Some other proposed to work on antiquity, but it was maybe we were not convinced. I can't explain exactly why, but we were not really convinced by these two ideas. So one of the proposition was the 17th century, and it was interesting because, the big trend back then was exploration. There was a lot of explorers. Of course, it was also the big era of colonization. It's a very difficult subject, but it was something that was really interesting, and that was, some of us in the team quite resonating with some ideas and emotion we want to talk about. It's also for French culture, something that is really important is a swashbuckling culture that is connected to the Three Musketeers, for example, which is a very famous book, French book. So using this type of setting could be interesting. The swordplay, even the costumes. It's something that was also very interesting. It was also a time period where there was this big plague pandemic. Back then, there was no COVID, so we were not that, I would say, connected to actuality, but it was something interesting. The costume of the plague doctors are interesting, but it's also something that was interesting on the scenario aspect, because using a pandemic could be a nice, I would say, subject for stories. So this was another point that was very important and interesting for us. It was also a time period where the humanist science developed itself a lot. And it was something that was also really interesting for us, for creating more factions, for missions, and creating quests. So a nice point that really brings some ideas also to the universe. It was also the golden age of the Dutch and Venetian Republic. So another type of government, something that is not seen much into the usual fantasy setting. So it was also a period where diplomacy was something very important, and the exchanges between the different countries coming from the old world were something, critical back then. So it was something that was really interesting to us. And then, of course, Inquisition. So another interesting point that would enrich our universe, and that was very developed back then in the time. So nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, but in that time period, it did. So the real question is, what's not to love within the 17th century? Of course, on the scenario writing aspect, not the real. I would have hated to live at that time period because of all the different points we talked about, except maybe humanist science. But at really a narrative point of view, a storytelling point of view, it's a very rich and very interesting time period. So we all decided inside the team to use that time period and to make a lot of research to just enrich and serve as an inspiration and source for Grateful. And it is a time period that was not used much. I mean, there are some games that are set around this time period, but in the end, this type of universe mixing this time period with fantasy are not that common. And it was, of course, something that was interesting to us. So why fantasy and not real history? Well, we're not historians, we're game developers. It's the first thing that is very important. Historical accuracy is very complicated, and we're not pretending to give history lectures. We're here to bring people, fun, to bring people emotions, and I hope a nice journey into a different universe, not to be teachers. And I've got a lot of respect for the teachers. It's not the question, but it's a different type of job. And the other point is that we were developing an RPG, and well, there are some RPGs existing without monsters of magic, but well, we like monsters and magic. So the idea was to be able to bring that type of elements inside our universe. But we had to mix into a subtle way these fantasy elements with our more historical universe without creating something that wouldn't be believable. So this was a more difficult part of the job. I will come back a little later on that point. The other, of course, the reverse question could be also asked, why historical inspiration and not complete fantasy? I think that having an historical background or at least an historical inspiration for the background is something quite useful. It helps having, with all the sources, having a more consistent universe because, well, history happens. So obviously everyone knows it's true. So by using some elements coming from truth, you make your fantasy universe more believable. At least that's what I experienced during the development of Grateful. And it also helps when you have when some players are playing. It's to have this kind of shared references. It's a way to not completely lost your gamers when they are playing in a completely weird and awkward universe. It's not easy to tell them some story, because you will first have to explain them everything. And when you have some shared references, I think that you can go a little faster and then focus more your story into what you want to talk about, and not just explaining what are those strange creatures and what these characters are doing there, and etc. So by mixing reality with fantasy, I think that you can, really create something that is reassuring for players, but also weird or original enough to create interest and curiosity. Well, so to create a world based on this idea, so 17th century fantasy, well, I had to now mix and make a lot of choices to create the good recipe to create this world. So of course, the first step was to find inspiration and to do a lot of research. I was not alone there. Obviously, it's a art director, and I mean, the whole team participates on the sound aspects. They looked for musics, to listen to some historical instruments. We spent time looking for movies, for series, looking at the lights, the graphical aspects, the costumes, but also reading a lot of historical stories from this part. It could be some. I also spent some time even to read some books wrote for the King of France about how they navigate back at the time, and it was very interesting. The language also was very different back then, so we had a lot of decision to make also on that point. And we really spent a lot of time searching for all this material to to feed in some ways the creative process of the universe. And then I went to my shopping list. Well, I'm calling that way, but it's something I'm doing most of the time when I have to create a universe. Grateful is not the first universe I'm created. I also create the one for Mars, for example. And it's a kind of, shopping list. I'm going through all these points, one after the other, and I'm trying to give as much consistent and complete answer I can. So beginning with the geography, because it's how the geography will have such an impact on everything else that it's my first point of interest. I need to know how is working this world. And of course, the climate, the geographic situation will have a huge impact on all the other points there. And then the morphology of the thinking species is, well, it's more important into sci-fi universe because it's something that is, of course, important when you have aliens, for example, or this type of thing, but it's also important to fantasy universe and so on. So I will go through these different points and explain you why and how I made the decision regarding Grateful specifically. So the geography of Grateful was, we wanted an island because we wanted to have part of this world at least to be separated from the rest of the world, to be something that is new and discovered. It's of course easier to discover an island than a whole, than just a part of your own continent. So it was making sense to create this island. We couldn't make a too big island because of some technological issues and also production constraints, because it's something that is quite important. We are a small studio. We were 35 developing that game, so we couldn't do a huge thing with plenty of different type of climates or different type of environments. So we had to choose a place where there would be a kind of common environment and climate. So we choose a kind of mix between Iceland and Ireland. So it's a very green place, but with some volcanoes. Well, you were able to see the map there. So this is the map of the island. And we also spent some time to do some research about the type of environment, but also the type of architecture. And the idea was, well, what if at the 17th century, an island like Iceland or like Ireland was discovered, and with its own inhabitants, and how would things would have happened. And of course, there are magical beings on this island and so on. So it was the first step. The second step was the thinking species. So even if we're not in sci-fi, we are in fantasy. We want a different type of fantasy, so no elves or dwarves, but we wanted to have this kind of magical humans or magical beings. In the end, all the characters in the islands are, humans, but some are influenced by their environments, and by using magic, we wanted them to be sharing physical thing with their own environments. So we spent some time trying to find the right design for these magicians in some ways. Where we could mix some elements of the natural aspects, so minerals, vegetation, with human aspects. So it was something interesting. It's also influenced a lot, of course, the design of the game, but also the costumes and also the story, because these marks of mix with nature is something that the player will be able to recognize later as a mark of magic and as something that is really typical to this island. Then we also spend some time thinking and developing the history, politics, and culture of the game. I regrouped here on one slide this aspect because it's something that is quite important for the game. As we wanted the game to have this diplomacy aspect, as I tell you before. So we wanted to take from the historical setting the most important elements and interesting elements also to enrich our universe. So we spent some time reading about the different political relationship between the countries back then. So of course, different countries of the old continent was exchanging a lot, but they were also meeting all these natives in the different parts of the world, not only in the US, but also in America, but also in Australia, for example, or in other places around the world. So these cultural meeting was also something, of course, very important to the consistency of the universe we wanted to create. And each country of the old world is inspired by a kind of mix of different nations of this era. So we've got the merchant congregation, which is a country that of the player. Which is a mix of Venetian influence and the Dutch Republic. It's a mercantilic nation, and they really have this kind of independent cities that are working together, but that are still keeping a very, I would say, independent political power. We also have Ptolemy, which is a more religious faction, which is inspired by the Spain back then, and also, of course, a mix with the Vatican. And we have the Bridge Alliance, which is a mix between England and Ottoman Empire. And even the other guilds that are not countries are also inspired by existing guilds back then, or groups, cultural groups. So it's something that was really interesting for us to study how these different real countries exchange, and where some at war, some at the contrary, were exchanging on the on the cultural aspect or on economic aspects. So this was really a strong inspiration. And of course, by doing the mix and not choosing one unique country, it allows us to add some more fantasy elements, and to be able to have something that was close to history, but not real history. And of course, we created our specific timeline that is related to the events of the game, but not only, because when I'm creating a universe, I'll always try to think the history a long time before the game, just to be sure that everything is working accordingly, that everything is consistent with what will happen in the game. And if I have to have characters who will talk about history or about the past, I know what happened because I already worked on these specific points. The spiritualities was also something very important, because the magic of the native is something that is coming and is very related to their own spirituality. But there is also a magic used by the people of the old continent, and mostly from Ptolemy. So it's a magic which is more also connected to religious aspects. So here again, we took some elements coming from Christianism or animism, depending on the different spirituality, and we mixed them with magic, and also, of course, with the history of our own world. So, but magic is something that is changing completely the vision on religion. If priests in the real world were able to create magic, obviously the belief would be stronger, and it would be nearly impossible to say this is not existing. So by integrating that into the way we create the universe, It also helps us to make the whole reaction of the people more consistent with what is happening inside the game. So you can see the different drawings that are shown here are all coming from the concept art of the game. And well, some are, designs for cities, environment, but also different symbols that were used for the different factions. When we had to create the fauna and flora, so of course it's something that is really connected to the game design's aspect, because all these creatures would be used in the game as enemies or ingredients, or plenty of gameplay and game designs related subjects. So it was something that we worked a lot with the game designers teams, and also, of course, the art director. And the idea was to have different types of creatures. Some would be close to real animals. So even if they could be bigger or stranger or whatever, they had to be, I would say, believable creatures, animals that could really exist, even if they are looking strange. And it's the same for the flora. So that was all this type of creatures, and also all this type of flora was really designed into, these are the natural environment, are connected to the natural environment of the island. So based on the geography, on the climate and so on, these are the type of creatures we should or could have in that island. And we also had the magical beings. And these magical beings have their own histories. They are not here, for nothing. So I also had to create a story for these beings. And these beings are completely different. They are magical, so they can be super huge, super weird, and it's okay with that. So by creating the story of these monsters, it also, of course, influenced their design. And it was a way to, once again, to have something more consistent and more believable. And the player is not obliged to discover this story, but can do some quests that will bring elements and information about this monster, and you can then understand where they're coming from. Something that is very important to us in that game is that, as we wanted the diplomacy aspect to be very important, we wanted to have these political group that would be important enough in the game to be really part of the gameplay. So we developed faction. We're not the first RPG to do that. And even our previous game, Technomancer, also had factions. But, well, we put a lot of different factions. We have 5 of them in the game. And all these factions will be important. They will have their own quests. They will have their own, important characters. And they will bring a lot of choices to the player. And it's something that I really love in RPGs, is when the player is able to make meaningful choices that will change or impact the story. And by using all these different factions, well, it's easier to bring some choices related to the different point of view of these groups. So for Gridfall specifically, even if you can create faction with plenty of different, it is enough for a group of people to have something in common to create a faction. But for Gridfall, we decided to use the countries, the native tribes, and some guilds. And when I have to develop the faction, in the end, I'm just doing a little the same than for the universe. I'm going through the shopping list again. So, but it's some few different questions, but in the end, it's a little the same processes. So, well, of course, where they're coming from, who is part of it, what are their stories, political views, and all these are very important points to develop a believable faction. But what is more, and what was more important into my process of creating the world of Gridfall and particularly these factions, is to give them a specific goal. So each of the faction wants something, or they're looking for something. And each faction has also some, outer conflicts. So some factions are fighting each others, but they also have, and it's very important to me, inner tensions. So there are some kind of subgroups inside each faction that have a slightly different philosophy, or that are looking for something different. And even if they share a goal with their own, their own faction, these subgroups are very interesting because it allows also more choices, and it allows inside the games the player to choose and to influence the philosophy of the faction. And it's also more believable, even inside a whole, I would say, I don't know, cultural group or religious group or philosophical group. It's still individuals, and they have not completely the same idea on, even on their shared goals. So by having these subgroups, it even makes, the universe more, not only consistent, but deeper also. And it was also very important because we were talking about some difficult subjects, and colonization being one of them. And when you're talking about this type of subject, if you have only, some very basic group where everyone is thinking the same, it will be difficult to be subtle when you're talking about difficult subjects. So, for example, if I had only one group for the natives, it would have obviously be, binary, and I didn't want that. So by having some subgroups and multiple subgroups, there are at least 3 subgroups for natives. It was, an easier way for me to be able to show plenty of different points of view, and then to let the player choose the point of view that he feels more comfortable with. So it was, honestly, an interesting way to enrich and to develop the world. But as you can see, for each factions, it's also a work on design aspect, because we have to think also on the architecture, on the costumes. The player has to be able to recognize a character from the way he's dressed, and from the different from the architecture of his houses and this type of thing. So it's really a work that is mixing plenty of influence, but also teamwork. So, and I'm going from the macro to the micro. So I begin always with the universe, and then factions, and then NPCs. And the main NPCs, the companions, but also the faction leaders, they have to be part of the factions. They have to be, deeply connected to the universe. Each of them will have also their own stories. I know that, but they have to have their personal stories, but also to have their own quest inside the game. And everything needs to be connected to give the feeling to the player that, once again, it's something that is consistent and believable. So by connecting everything, the universe, the faction, and the character, it makes things more solid. So when I'm working on characters, of course, I'm thinking about a lot of things, but some characters took also inspiration into historical ones. It's not always character of the same time period. For example, this character here is Constantine. It's an important NPC in the game. And I took inspiration for his personal story into Nero. So because it's a character I find very, very interesting. He has an incredible personal story. And by studying the story of this character, I was able to bring some believable and interesting elements to his own backstory. Of course, I changed it enough to adapt it to my own world, but it was something. that allow me to create an interesting background without, going into some over drama or binary attitudes or this type of things. By looking into an historical character, in some ways, I'm sure that this type of story can exist because it happened. So it's also something that I'm using a lot when I'm writing characters. But in the end, and it will be the last slide, Grateful was really a teamwork. Each person working in the team brought, his own ideas or her own ideas, and some inspiration because of their own background or of what they wanted to have in the game. So it's not the work of a single writer or a single designer. It's really something that came from the team, where we had all these influences and sources. And my main work in the end was mostly to take all the ideas and to try to wave them in some ways. Of course, some ideas were after a while and after some tests forgotten because they were not working with the rest. But it was really about waving all these influences and feedbacks and ideas and sources into a world. And but the sparks were coming from all the team. Thank you. And well, I will hand the screen sharing, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer. I don't know if I can see the Q&A. You're welcome. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. I know I went maybe a bit fast on some point, or if you have anything to ask, please. I'll be really happy to answer. As you may have seen regarding all these artworks, one of the big inspiration on the artistic aspect was the paintings, the Flemish paintings of the 17th century, and it was an important and a very difficult work for us, because we wanted as much as possible to find how to recreate this type of rendering inside the game. It was mostly a technical work, to be honest. I was not that much involved into it, but it was also, of course, an important work for the art director and his whole team. But well, it's something that was also important to, I think, to the success and consistency of the universe, because the time era was also reflected by the graphical aspect of the game. Well, any tips on somehow weaving all ideas together? Well, I agree. It can be difficult to choose which ideas, and to one risk obviously is to end with a patchwork of ideas that are not working quite well together. Honestly, that is where history is very useful, because it gives a kind of I would say secure line or something. If something is too out of place regarding this historical reference, something that, for example, I don't know, if some of the team would have come with automatics or robots or something like that, we could imagine a kind of steampunk stuff, but it would have been too far from the history setting we had. So I think that it was also interesting, by using this history reference, it was giving us some kind of boundaries in some ways. Two other question. Is there a book you would recommend? To be honest, I read plenty, and I'm always reading plenty of books when I'm working on word creation. It's always difficult to choose one or the other to tell you as a reference, because it can be historical books, it can be also hard books. We also went, and it's something that I really recommend you, if you are in a company working or taking inspiration into an historical setting, go into museum. And not only you or your art director, but bring the whole team to the museum. We were able to do that. It was not COVID period. It was then easier, of course, to go to the museums. But we were lucky enough to have a huge exhibition in the Louvre in Paris back then on Vermeer. And it was amazing to be able to take the whole team to this exhibition. Um, at first, the feedback from the developers was, and mostly from the programmers, why should we go to the museum? We're not involved into this part of the process. But at the end, they were very, very happy to be there. It was a kind of team event, so it was nice for I think for the team spirit, but also for everyone to realize what was the inspiration. It was easier for the whole team to be involved into the period, into the universe, into the world. So we went also to a museum in France, which is called the Invalides, where it's an army museum, so but an old army museum. So there are plenty of amazing Renaissance weapons, old cannons, and all this type of stuff. We also went to a native art museum, which is completely amazing. So by being able to create these events, we also worked with some costume designers that are working with the cinema. And we went with some members of the team to meet them and for them to explain how they were creating historical costumes. So by having these meetings or these events, it also helps the whole team to really feel as they are part of this world, and it helps. Other question, what are the qualities artistic eye? Well, environment is a very important way to tell stories. And I think that it's something that is becoming more and more important, mostly with this idea of emergent storytelling. So by having some meaningful environment, it's something that helps the players to really feel the immersion of the game. So, well, it's important on my aspect, so the writing aspect, to give as much narrative information about the environment. So the world, of course, itself is important, but afterwards, when we began to work with the level designers and with also the concept artists that worked on designing the environment, I spent some time really thinking about each of the places, important places on the game, to give them also history, as if they were characters. And I think that by thinking environments as characters, and I know that it's exactly also the way our art directors work when he's designing environments. If you think of an environment as a character with its own story, it really helps to bring some interesting details that will completely change, I think, the way players will discover these places. It will make them, it's not a random place where you put some crates and some trees and stuff like that. The trees are there because there were, back then there was a forest, but the forests were partly cut and so on. So if you're always thinking into that type of things, it will help. And also it's very helpful for me because I can, easily name this place because I know their history. And it's easier to have a meaningful map also, because all the names will be related to what happened on these different places. Other question, sorry. Well, do you have any other question? I hope it, well, my answers help you. And well, it's honestly, it's funny because a lot of people think that creating that world took a long time. In fact, creating the, just the basic this of the world took, I think, 2 months or something. So it's not that long. But afterwards, we had to go into all the details, and some details happen, far later in the process. For example, the creation of the language. We had this idea at the beginning. We wanted the natives to have a specific language. And we had to look for a linguist, so someone who would be able to create that language. And well, it took some time to find the right people to work with him, and then to have the final language, to integrate it into all the dialogues, to learn this language to the actors who would embodied native characters. It was very funny. It was very complicated also. Some actors were a bit, lost because they had to learn this completely new and weird language that is not existing. But it was really interesting and rewarding, I think, in the end, because it really brings something that helps to make the whole thing consistent. So it's in fact, it's easier for me now because I'm now, and I can look back to all the process. Some ideas were very difficult to put together. All these faction quests, all the choices we had in the game were difficult from time to time to handle. It created a lot of bugs. So the Q&A part where we had to debug everything was quite painful, to be honest. The amount of dialogues was enormous, so because of all these choices. So I had to work a lot during a long time period to write all the dialogues, and a lot of time also in studio with all the actors to record everything. So some choices were painful at the moment, but because we really thought these choices was really important to the consistency of the universe, we decided to stick to them, and I think it worth it, even if it was painful. So, but making choices into the creation of a world and then developing a game, that it's the basic of the world, but and we had also, of course, to forget about some points that were not that important or too difficult to develop or that type of things. But well, in the end it worked, probably because there is a mix of luck. you always have to count on luck, but also of experience. It's not our first game, and the team work together since a long time, even if we have, of course, new employees, but I think it helps. So it's a mix of different things. And well, if there is no more question, I think we're reaching the end of the presentation. Anything else? Well, I think there is no more question. Oh. Well, I did some, the question is is there a way to kind of teach your fellow developers the world? As I told you before, sharing of the sources with the whole team is the first point. And then to share all the elements, the narrative and storytelling elements about the universe. We create a wiki. I know it's a very basic thing, but it helps to share with the whole team all the different elements. So I was writing the articles, and the concept artist and art director also had, their designs and drawings. So it was a way for all the members of the team to be able to find any information at any time. And we also did a kind of narrative or storytelling presentation where I basically told the story of the world and of part of the game to the team, as a kind of storytelling time. And it was interesting. I think it was interesting to be sure that everyone knew. Yeah. So at the end of the presentation, for real. And well, it was very interesting speaking with you. I really regret, that the situation didn't allow me to be for real with you, but well, maybe another time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. That was really great. I will wait a few more seconds for people to thank you because they really appreciate it. And then I will, unless you have something more to add.
No, well, it's always difficult, just to manage the time, just to be sure that people have enough time to ask questions. And but well, I think that I hope it was okay for.
It was great
for everyone. And well, I hope I'll be able, maybe next year we'll be able to make a real life event, and I'll be able to meet your team and everyone else.
Yeah, I'm also really looking forward to it, really. Let's hope so. Okay, thank you so much.
Nice afternoon, and well, I wish you the best too.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.